This is another example of cooperation between AES and Extension. Dr. Blain Horn is our area educator. He's stationed in Buffalo, covers northeastern part of the state for the Sustainable Management of Rangeland Resources issue team within Extension, and he's doing several different forage trials here on our facility. And so I'll let Blain talk to you guys a little bit more about it.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, as you mentioned, I'm not going to go into Extension's all their initiative teams, but I kind of cross over because if you heard Sustainable Management of Rangeland Resources, and my education's in range, but I also at one time worked a bit more in forages. And this would be more of a profitable, sustainable ag, but so far my supervisors have not called me on it, or my colleagues make me stop. But I will remember right off the bat, or sat in and forgot. I won't forget. I thank you to make sure to remind me. This project I'm going to talk about here is funded through Wyoming Department of Agriculture through one of their agriculture producer research grant program. And we have a matching grant. I have to thank Dr. Hess for that matching grant as well on the funding. So I need to recognize that there's anybody here in the Department of Agriculture. I need to thank them for doing this, and I also have to ask them to bear with me or us on this project. What the project is, well, just back up a little bit, give a little history so you understand why we're doing some perennial cool season grasses for forage production under irrigation. Is 2 years ago at the field day, I gave a presentation, classroom type, that they had set up on some work I'd done at two different producers, one in very southern Sheridan County along Piney Creek, and another one near Ucross along Clear Creek, for those familiar with the area, just inside Johnson County, looking at some different grasses under irrigation hay production. And a board member for the Whitney Foundation actually was there, and he come and told us at the end that I don't use any of those grasses. Really? What do you use? Latar orchard grass. Now that's interesting because I had played around a little bit with Paiute orchard grass, and there is a million different orchard grass varieties with not much success. Establishment fine, but very low production. But Roy Garber said, boy, I get great production on the Latar. So we got to Anwar, who's our forage specialist on campus, who's right now, I guess, is in Japan. Axel Garcia, who at the time was our irrigation specialist over Powell. Valcho, who at the time was the director here. Anyway, put together, I wrote a proposal with the idea of looking at not only Latar, but another variety of orchard grass, along with some other grasses. And for those familiar with hay production, perennial grass hay production here in this part of Wyoming, kind of the standard is smooth brome grass. For the most part, probably the variety Manchar, although I would not be surprised there might be some Lincoln variety, older varieties. But also, you always people refer to it as Regar brome grass. Well, Regar brome grass is actually a meadow brome grass, and Regar was just the very first varietal release. I do not have Regar in here. I have Paddock. Paddock is a derivative from Regar, and Anwar in a project I think maybe we're going to be looking at it after this or a little later, has Fleet, which is another offshoot of Regar. So what we have is a total of 14 grasses, 7 species, 2 varieties of each species to look and just compare. And the other caveat on this project was we're going to look at 2 different irrigation rates. One we kind of labeled as full irrigation, and at this point don't ask me what exactly that is, but we'll definitely keep the soil moist, keep it near field capacity as much as possible. And then we debated around and about what the reduce would be. We've kicked it around maybe as a 50% reduction. Again, it's kind of to narrow that down or figure out exactly what it is has been a little bit of a struggle. I had got some thinking about it, thought maybe what we ought to do is, because people with junior water rights, what happens to them? Generally, they don't have any water come later in the summer. You know, if there's water, they'll have it, unless it's a real drought year, they'll have water up front. But I did visit with one of those producers I worked with on the other study, and he said, no, I'd like to see you stay at the idea of just reducing the amount of water in the spring, early summer, because if I can raise nearly as much hay on lower amount of water, it'll save me costs. So that's probably the route we're going to do. Now, we got the funding. We planted this trial May 20th of last year. a little later than I would like to go, but I've had success. And the reason we went that late was mainly because Phil just was not ready in terms of being able to get in with the drill. And this is very high clay soil, so it doesn't take much moisture for anybody to use clay, and things will gum up a bit. So we weren't able to get in until about the 20th. And unfortunately, I think two things happened. We probably should have, as soon as we got done planting, should have been running the pivot over it, because as it turned around, it didn't want to rain anymore. However, I'm not sure that would have mattered, because this was the first year for something new in this, well, I shouldn't say something new in this field. It had been in alfalfa. It was getting pretty poor stand. They had to took it out, and the producer planted Siberian millet or German millet, I believe. Fine, but to keep the prussic acid problem down, he waited a bit to harvest it. And okay, that's fine, except for one thing. And anybody who raises alfalfa and has had millet probably knows this. But we had a lot of seed shatter, and we had one heck of a lot of volunteer millet. Last year's field day, I had a conflict. I was not able to come up here and see the plots. Anamar, fortunately, is here, probably talk to the folks. A week or two after that, I was able to come up, and I'm driving by on the road over there, and I'm seeing it just as green as can be and stuff. I'm thinking, oh, great, man, we got stands. And I come and start looking at them going, something's not right here. And Jeremiah Vardaman, at the time, was the assistant farm manager here. He saw us out here, come down here, it's all volunteer millet. And I think whatever germination we might have had on our perennials, it took it out. Just outcompeted because it germinated, grew so fast, shaded it out. So Dan and I, September 8th, we reseeded this whole area. We're getting right over the top, same varieties, seeding rates. So we're getting really good at that ShREC drill, getting it calibrated to what should be the rates. And we got some germination. Now I kicked myself, hindsight being 2020, I wish I was out here about the 1st of November and gone through every plot and made notes about what looks like it germinated, because I knew we had some germination. Dan had seen some. I was here the 20th of October, just to take some soil core samples for to help again texture and with the idea of getting the irrigation in line, but did not take any notes with regard to what looked like might have established. And not everything, apparently, whether established or came up, I don't know, but this spring we had some grasses looking pretty good, and we had some plots just looks like nothing. Finally, there are some plants, but we have what grasses have established, and I have taken some yield data. I just did some plot sampling with the hoop. As a range person, you're good at that. But I told Dan, I said, this is the last time I'm ever doing this on this again. We are going in with the machine to harvest no matter what we have, because that gets to be a work and you don't get quite as good at data. But I can tell you offhand, right now, probably the grass that's doing the best out there, the best establishment and overall production is the intermediate wheatgrass. There's the Wahee, and that's the interesting thing. Like I said, we had two varieties. The Wahee is doing better than the Rush. Luna pubescent wheatgrass, which is a pubescent a natural variety, if you will, cultivar of intermediate, but it's in a pubescent form. And a Luna's an old variety. It is doing really well. It's not probably produced as much as Wahee at this time, but it is doing very well in establishment. But the variety Manska, not as good. Then the two metal brooms we have is Paddock and Macbeth. Macbeth's out of Montana, a newer variety. The Paddock is really doing real well. The Macbeth, so-so. The ones that really surprised me is the two smooth brome grasses, the Manchar and the Carlton. The Carlton's doing a little better establishment than the Manchar, but that surprised me because smooth brome's usually pretty good at establishing. However, all four of those grasses are rhizomatous in nature. I think even the ones that are not as thick as we'd like to see them at this time will fill in. We might still later do a dormant seeding and run over them. The Timothy orchard grasses, tall fescues, there are plants in places, and you go through, you mark the signs. If anybody wants, I do have a plot map of it. At least of this trial, there's 4 replications that go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then there's another set 1, 2, 3, 4. We don't have them on this pivot yet, but there'll be nozzles put on that they can adjust the amount of flow of water. So didn't hire the person this year just because of the way of poor stand establishment. But I'll probably have a student next year that will monitor these. When the pivot comes to a spot, he'll stop and have to go out there and just do some switching on the nozzles and get a different irrigation rate. But that's point that out on this plot map. So it's just the plots I have to show you is just the first 2 reps this way if you want the map. And another thing I want to point out, and part of this project too, is the brome grasses generally mature sooner than a lot of these others, especially the intermediate and pubescent wheatgrasses. So instead of harvesting them all at the same time, because either you get too far with the bromes and they're going to go be lower quality. We wanted to harvest them optimum in terms of production, yield, and quality. Same with the 2 wheatgrass, or the 4 wheatgrasses, the 2 species. They mature a little later. They're beyond now. They'll start getting ranked, but wanted to catch them basically, might say, at optimum production in terms of dry matter yield and quality. So so in other words, we wouldn't come out here in one day harvest everything. It'd be anywhere from 2 to 3 times, depending on how the stage of maturity of the grasses. I think with that, I turn it over any questions you might have. I either did a great job or they just baffled y'all.
Do the signs apply to a row, or how do you?
He asked if the signs, okay, I'll just give you an example. See that post there, the orange flag on, just like this one? And you're way down, there's another one. You see another one way over there. This Carlton smooth brome goes as far as that flag, and they did mow in between. So this is one set of plots. They marked each one, so they go, and obviously as you get way down, this starts out about 100 feet in length, and we get to the 4th one, it's 300 feet, but then there's another set. If you want, the plot map kind of shows that, and I'll hand that out to anybody who's interested. Sir?
How do you know when you're at your best quality for your grass? Do you do it by eyeball, or do you do a sugar or protein count?
Well, we will take quality on it. Okay, thanks, John. He's wanting to know how we're going to determine in terms of best quality, or the optimum, in this sense optimum. Basically, we'll look at when it gets into anthesis. In other words, the head grass flowering. At that point, it's really not going to put on any more pounds of production, and quality still be pretty good. I mean, it will be a little lower than if we say harvest it with it just coming out of boot. In other words, the seed head just emerging. So basically, it'll wash for that anthesis, that flowering. And you
Quality in terms of crude protein.
Pardon?
Crude protein.
Crude protein, and we will measure crude protein. We will measure energy, TDN for some. We will measure the minerals, the whole package of minerals as well. But crude protein is going to be the one that's, if any of them declines as it starts maturing, getting seed ripe, will be the crude protein. Sir?
Are any of these possible for grazing, or is this mostly for forage?
Thank you for that question. Yes, if any of these are possible for grazing or just forage or hay protection, they all would be possible for that. In fact, part of the project will be, when we get here within the next day or 2, they're going to go ahead and take all this off. And we'll see some regrowth. I think since the pivot's sitting over there, I assume it's been irrigated. The way this spring was, it would have blown out, our idea of different irrigation levels because of the amount of rain we received. But anyway, we will in late September come out and take some samples for regrowth. And I'm playing with the idea, because the size of these plots, now this may force me to do hand clipping, but it'll be at a stage when it's a lot lower, 12 inches higher or so, and do a kind of a mimic for management intensive grazing, collect some data on these grasses for that. I haven't worked that out. That's something I'll do this winter, but hopefully I have time to do it. But yeah, all of them are suitable for grazing as well as hay production. They can do a dual purpose.
Will you do any digestibility examination on the grasses?
He asked if we would do any digestibility, and that's what I said. We'll take energy, or in other words, total digestible nutrients, or net energy maintenance, and that is derived from what's a process, a lab process called acid detergent fiber, familiar with that, and that's measuring digestibility. You can measure TDN from that, digestible dry matter, etc. So yes, we will. And I did, like I said, I took some, in fact, I sampled, I think it was June 18th, 4 bromes. The 4 brome grasses altogether. Came back 2 weeks later and did the intermediate and pubescent wheat grasses, and decided to go ahead and do the bromes again, in case I caught the others just a little sooner. And then that'll give me an idea again, how much more I put on, because I know when I did it the second time, it's been about 2 weeks already since I did the intermediates, but we definitely was a little late then. Bromes, a lot of producers will harvest it at that stage, but I know quality goes down, so we'll have the dollars to analyze all those, since we won't be analyzing 6 of the other grasses at this time. Okay, folks, we got another little trial here that's only funded actually by the Ag Experiment Station and the Sheridan R E Center. I've got, what do I have? I think I have 4 grasses in here, but 1 grass planted at 2 different row widths, or 3 different row widths. But what got me thinking on this, one of the grasses in here is Russian wild rye. Not a grass you normally would put under irrigation. It's a very drought tolerant grass, but very palatable grass, fairly productive. But I have it along with intermediate, and that's thrown in when we built my leach field for our place. And so I actually get some added moisture, and no livestock at this time to graze it. And I didn't want stuff this tall and then end up fire hazard later in the wintertime or fall. So I'd mow it, and I'd notice that Russian wild rye would regrow. I mean, hot like this in the summertime, as long as it had moisture to tap into, it'd regrow. So it made me think, man, I'd like to see what that would do, just actually do a study on it. But I thought, well, I'll throw a couple other grasses. And in this one, I have, again, the paddock meadow brome grass, because meadow brome, unlike smooth brome, will do some regrowth. You know, anybody's smooth brome, you harvest it in mid to late June, you don't see any regrowth till fall. The meadow bromes will. And then I think I've got tall fescue, which I've not done work with tall fescue, so I just do a little research, and one other. But another thing I got thinking about on the Russian wild rye, and the reason I have it planted at 8 inches, 16 inches, and 24, is I mentioned these other 2 producers. We had Russian wild rye in their irrigated trials, and the reason I had it in there, I had seed available, and I thought, what the heck, we'll look at it. It did well, but eventually it went out. And for a grass that's drought tolerant under irrigation, I think it would stay and be fine. But it's a bunch grass, so the rhizomatous ones kind of took it over. However, I got thinking about it. If you ever look about Russian wild rye, the recommendation, especially on drier land, is to plant it like 18, 24-inch rows. Part of it's because it's got such an extensive root system and it competes with itself. So I got to wondering, maybe the reason it went out of those 2 the areas, 2 different trials, more than anything, was it choked itself out. I don't know if that's what really happened, but I'm speculating. So I thought, well, I don't know how long, many years we'll be able to have this in, but if we can have 4 or 5 years, we'll probably see that. So I thought, let's go wider spacings, even though it's under irrigation. I mean, there's drawbacks to that wider, but see what kind of production we get. Now we've got good establishment on all the grasses except the Russian wild rye, but that didn't surprise me because it seems to be a little slow and tougher to get established, but it'll surprise you. Next thing, it might be 2 years later, I forgot I'd planted some there. Here it is. So we'll see how long it takes. Now those 2 other locations when we planted it, we got establishment. The one we got established right away the first year. I think the other one, it took an extra year. So that's really what this is about. So we'll do some clipping, let's see what kind of regrowth. More on as asked earlier, this would be more on a grazing type deal if it'd be for grazing. It didn't have Russian wild rye in that, otherwise I just would have done it in there. So that's what this is about, and I have to thank Brett and Brian and Dan for allowing me this little chunk of ground. It's replicated 4 times, but it only goes, well, you can see how far it goes down the mowed area. They mowed it off. We're dealing with millet, volunteer millet again on this, so we got to see if some herbicides we might be able to put in to knock it out, possibly, but I think maybe the perennials are going to come and be fine. Any questions with regard to this one?